All right, we are entering into the home stretch. We have the single most daunting task that any presenter ever wants, which is the after lunch food coma. So just to make sure I could turn it up a few notches, I just downed the cup of coffee to make sure I'm going to pour into you a super caffeinated last session together. If I see anybody falling asleep, I'll go get you one of those super caffeinated cups of coffee. So with that, we've gone through a journey. Go ahead and open up your Making Missionary Disciples. Go to the table of contents. Hopefully you have it dog-eared by now, so it's ready to go. So we started off the day by talking about the importance of our divine intimacy, our relationship, our love affair with God, me and Jesus. Then we spent in session 2 time talking about authentic friendship, Curtis's words, authentic brotherhood, our words, how iron sharpens iron and how we all need to help one another to grow on this journey. And we've also looked at the leadership track of this, that we are growing the person that God wants us to be the change that we want to see in the world by growing in virtue, growing in holiness, growing in our love of God, and that's how we lead ourselves by following the leader. And then we've talked about how building authentic brotherhood gives us the opportunity to begin to lead others. And now we're going to shift down to this final stretch where we're going to look at clarity and conviction for the little way of evangelization and how this is an opportunity to lead leaders. So why again are we doing all this? During the lunch break, I was one of the interviewees with Gil over on the microphones. And Gil said a phrase. He said, strengthen the man, strengthen the family. Strengthen the family, strengthen the church. Strengthen the church, transform the culture. So if we truly want to see the culture transformed, whether it's in our neighborhood, whether it's in the boundaries of our parish, whether it's within your diocese or archdiocese, whether it's in California, throughout the nation, around the world, we have to reverse engineer that and say we need a stronger church. We need the church to be the light that we have been called to be the salt and light, to bring to the world the hope of Jesus Christ. And for that to happen, we need strong, vibrant families, and those strong, vibrant families are led by strong men. And so that's why we are here, and that's why we say we have to learn how to lead ourselves with God's help, how to lead others, and then if we want to have the most profound effect, we have to learn how to carry this in your group, in your parish, to leading leaders. That's what clarity and conviction for the little way is. When we hear the Great Commission, we are told to go and be disciples in our recliner in front of the TV. Oh wait, that's not the Great Commission. We're not called to go and be disciples. We're called to go and make disciples of all nations. We can't do that on our own. We have to now go out and engage and share the hope of Jesus with others. And it is in not only being disciples, but we need to become disciple makers, and we need to be disciple makers who make not only other disciples, but make other disciple makers who make other disciple makers who make other disciple makers. And in so doing, that's how you will see exponential impact far beyond anything you can do on your own. That's where Curtis refers to the phrase as spiritual multiplication. Let me give you a visual of this that really helped me to kind of, in my mind, think this through strategically. So I'm going to draw a chart. And we're going to have the two axes of this chart. This axis is going to be, actually I'm going to change that one. I'm going to make this axis impact, and this axis will make it time. Okay. I presume you are here because you feel that God has something He wants you to do to make a difference in the world. Maybe it's in your home, maybe it's in your community, maybe it's across the state or around the nation, but you feel that God's not done with you yet. He's calling you to greatness, and you want to make a difference. You don't know maybe what that is, but that's what you feel led to do. So if that's the case, I want you to think about this. Let's say you're here. You're just getting started in making a difference. And in this case, let's talk about it as men's ministry. Let's use that as the example. And you say, I want to grow, and I want to be better, and I'm going to focus on this leadership of self, this divine intimacy. So you start to pray. You start to get involved in the sacraments. You go to confession more. You are spending time with God. You're spending time in adoration. And as a result, it's starting to spill over. And maybe you're actually starting to get involved in, I'm going to live out my faith at church. I'm going to live out my faith at home. I'm going to share my faith. But there's only so much that you can do to make a difference as just one person, because there's this natural limitation called time. There's only 24 hours in a day. And so even as you grow yourself as a leader, you will only be able to do so much if the only person that is doing anything is you. You could be the very best evangelist in the world and have the best messages, make the best videos and podcasts, and you could speak around the world, but you're going to only reach so many people because you only have 24 hours in your day. There's going to be a limit, and eventually when you hit that limit of whatever you can do in 24 hours a day, that is the limit on the impact you will be able to have over time, because you can't get more time than 24 hours a day. So if we just stop on the self-leadership and trying to be the best ourselves and doing it as a solo sport, we can make a difference. And there are people who do this, and they do make a difference. Are you making your greatest difference? Are you unlocking and unleashing your God-given potential to its fullest? I would argue no. So then you say, okay, I recognize that I can't grow a men's ministry if I'm the only man. It would be called a man's ministry. I'm going to have a men's ministry. So we're going to start to get others involved. And so what do? You start to invite others to get involved. And you tell them, hey, begin this relationship with Jesus. We're going to have this encounter. We're going to build the relationship. And you're going to have this divine intimacy with Jesus. And you're leading and helping them to do that. And they say, wow, this is really awesome. And I'm going to start to build this authentic brotherhood. And I'm going to start to live out my faith. And then I'm going to start to be this great virtuous leader. And that person reaches their limit. And then you recruit somebody else. And you're leading somebody else, and they reach their limit. And so over time, each of these people is just like you. There's only so much they can do themselves, but collectively you get an additive effect. That's good. That's because you're now leading others. You realize you can't do it on your own. But all of a sudden you realize, even still, the trajectory of that is very linear. And you say to yourself, I want to have the greatest impact. I want God to do through me everything he possibly can, to where it's him working, not just me. And the only way I can do that to its maximal capacity is through what Curtis Martin describes as spiritual multiplication. It's when I realize it's not just me leading myself and doing this my own. It's not just me leading others, but I am going to be forming other leaders. I'm going to be helping other men not just to be disciples, but to be disciple makers. And when you do that, all of a sudden, this turns into that hockey stick exponential growth curve, because you will have leaders developing leaders, developing leaders, developing leaders, and the impact will spread beyond anything you could ever imagine. Let me give you an example, a very real example of this, that I think will help to make the example real. So I'm going to take this for a second away from ministry to men, and instead I'm going to apply it to where I got started in pro-life work. So God convicted me when an abortion center opened in my town in College Station, Texas, that I was supposed to respond to this crisis. My heart was broken about the fact that women were being wounded in my town, and some of them were being hospitalized from botched abortions, and children were dying on my watch in my town, and I felt convicted to do something about it. So I started to get involved in the pro-life movement, and I did what I could, and I was growing myself. I was learning, I was educating, I was learning how to communicate the pro-life message, but I quickly hit my limit when I realized I can only do so much. There's only 24 hours of the day, so I kind of started to cap out of what I could do. And then I realized it's not just me, it's we, and I'm going to invite others. And so I began to recruit others, and I began to lead them. And I ran a local pro-life organization called the Coalition for Life. And I began to build a staff, I began to recruit volunteers, and collectively we started to see some momentum building. And while I was there, we led this local campaign called 40 Days for Life. It was the first one in the country. It was back in 2004. And so during that time, we saw the great impact. Abortions went down 28% in our town. Our local pregnancy centers were bursting at the seams with women who had previously been scheduled for abortions. They had a change of heart. They left. We were seeing amazing things, people finding healing from past abortions. And we were realizing we had this linear growth curve. Things were going well. Planned Parenthood labeled our town the most anti-choice place in the nation. We took it as a compliment, but they never sent us the award. I don't know. I don't think they meant it as a compliment. But in the midst of that, we started to realize that God was up to something. And God was doing something through this little humble 40-day campaign we had done, purely we did it just out of an hour of prayer and saying, how can we make a difference to help women and to help children and to walk with them and to serve and guide and help them make a better decision they won't regret for the rest of their lives. And we started to hear from other cities and towns, we heard what you did and we'd like to do it. And all of a sudden I realized that we had an opportunity to go from leading myself to leading others to all of a sudden, what if we started to lead leaders? What could happen? And so, initially it was 7 individual cities: Houston, Texas; Dallas, Texas; Green Bay, Wisconsin; Kitsap County, Washington; Charlotte, North Carolina. These cities began to replicate what they had heard we did through the 40 days, and we would cheer them on and say, you can do it, and we'd give them tips and advice. But I started to realize that if I leaned into the leaders, they could lean into others. They would be growing themselves, they'd be leaning into others, and it would have a multiplying effect, not just an additive effect. We started to say, we're on to something. So by 2007, I realized God was up to something and decided to organize the first nationally coordinated 40 Days for Life. And so in doing that, I put the word out thinking we'd have maybe 15 or 20 cities do this simultaneously. I had 89 leaders raise their hands in cities across 33 states saying, I'm willing to do this. And so I realized I now need to invest as a leader in other leaders. And so I quit my job that I was working for another organization, and I went all in, as Deacon Steve talked to us about, to serve those leaders. Because I knew if I help them lead, if I help them succeed at their mission, it's going to lift this entire thing much higher than what I could ever do, or even what I and other people in our town could do. And we saw that campaign just explode out of the gates. The next one was larger. The next one was larger. Pretty soon we got to the point where this was happening in hundreds of cities at a time. We collectively had seen more than 750,000 volunteers. Tens of thousands of lives were being saved, but we kept focusing on leading leaders. And in doing that, I one time was asked to go down to California, and it was down near Tampa. And I was asked to speak to help one of the local leaders down there. So I went down to serve that leader. And I was trying to invest and help him. And while there, he had a dismally disappointing event where he had wanted to bring a lot of people out, and hardly anybody came. And he was like, oh, it was a failure. I was like, it's never a failure. Somebody is here that God wants here. We're going to make the most of it. And so we set up a little video camera as well as giving the event. And unbeknownst to me, a month later, a guy in London, England would see that video. So here I was down serving a guy in Florida. The event was supposedly a failure. Record on video, put the video online. A guy in London, England sees it and says, we have abortions in London, this 40 days thing in the United States, let's try to do it here. So Robert Cahoon volunteers to lead the first 40 Days for Life campaign in Europe, and it was in London. They close an abortion center. It starts gaining momentum. They start building other campaigns. He starts recruiting other leaders. So Robert, I'm starting to invest in him as a leader through another leader that I'd met, and Robert starts developing other leaders in Europe. Along the way, Robert meets a guy that comes to him from Zagreb, Croatia. Croatia is part of the former Yugoslavia that broke up during the Balkan conflict. And Ante is a school teacher, and he says, Robert, I hear about all that's going on in England. Can you help me? And so Robert, as a leader, leans into Ante. Ante, a school teacher, helps him run the first 40 Days for Life campaign in Zagreb, the capital of Croatia. It's outside of a hospital. They have 5 lives saved, and they have an abortionist that quits doing abortions in Zagreb as a result. So Ante's fired up. So we're now multiple generations of leaders down the pipeline here. Ante says, this needs to be happening all over Croatia. The Catholic faith is on fire in Croatia. If you haven't been, daily masses are packed with young people. It's amazing to see what God is doing there. Ante says we need to get more young people leading 40 Days campaigns, and he starts recruiting leaders to recruit leaders. And so within a few months, Ante's calling me and saying, David, we've got 15 40 Days for Life campaigns going on across Croatia, and Croatia is about the size of New Jersey, to give you context. And so he says, we'd love for you to come over here, and they were our fastest growing international market. I said, I'm in, I'm going to do it. So I'm now multiple leaders of generation away. We have hundreds of thousands of people involved through all these leaders. I fly over to Zagreb, and Ante and his wife take our family all over the country. But the place that most profoundly impacted me in Croatia was in the city of Vukovar. So Vukovar is right on the Danube River. It's right across from Serbia. and it was one of the areas that was hardest hit during the Balkan conflict. And so while there, you could feel the darkness in this city. We heard stories of people who had family members shot and put into mass graves. We had sidewalk counselors that were praying outside the abortion center that had been raped by enemy combatants during the war. There were buildings that were still damaged from the shelling that had happened across the river there. And so it was a place that felt hopelessness, but there was this bright hope as people were out there praying and singing. So we went out to the hospital in Vukovar, and outside the hospital there were more than 100 people praying together in Croatian. I don't speak Croatian. And they were singing, and they were helping mothers who were at risk of having abortions. And right after we went to the hospital, they took me to a house. They said it was for a meeting. They were pulling the wool over my eyes because it was for an encounter. We got to this little bitty house in Vukovar, Croatia, and a woman is brought in to me. She doesn't speak English, so through a translator, she shares that months earlier, she had been going to that hospital to have an abortion. And she saw the people praying outside. And they said, "We will help you." And she said, "I'm in an abusive relationship. I don't have money. I don't know what to do." And they said, "We'll do whatever." So they helped her get medical care. They helped her get out of the abusive relationship. They helped her and walked with her throughout her entire pregnancy. She described it as being surrounded by love. And she said, "Just 2 weeks ago, I gave birth to my daughter, and I named her Petra." And through the translator, she says to me, "Would you like to meet Petra?" And I said, "I would love to meet Petra." And a woman comes from around the corner of the house, this little 2-week-old baby girl, and lays her in my arms. And I'm thinking back to one little town, recruiting others, then starting to recruit leaders, and Robert in England, and Ante in Zagreb, to Lydia in Vukovar, Croatia. And here I am meeting a child who's alive by the grace of God, who was scheduled to be aborted because somebody led somebody else who led somebody else who led somebody else. And I'm meeting a life that was saved as a result on the other side of the world where I don't even speak the language. The reason this story is so fresh on my mind right now last night in my hotel room around the corner, Lydia, the lady who was the leader of the Vukovar campaign, she sends me a message. She said, "Did you realize just a couple of weeks ago, Petra just had her 9th birthday, and she's praying for you. Pray for her." The joy of knowing that when we are willing to not just lead ourselves, not just lead others, but tap into this spiritual multiplication that can happen, this exponential impact by leading leaders who can lead leaders, you never know down the road the transformed lives, the saved lives, the impacted souls, because you were willing to learn how to lead leaders. So what's the method for doing this? What is this method modeled by the master? Antonio's already queued up to put the sticky on the wall. Thank you very much. Well, when I was running 40 Days for Life, little did I know that Curtis Martin and I were on a very similar page, even though we at that point hadn't met. We're good friends today, but I didn't know him. So here was the model that I used during the decade that I was leading 40 Days for Life. And don't write this down because we're going to translate this and make it much more applicable to what you do based on the way Focus has carried it out. Okay, do you like my drawing skills? I mean, this takes a lot of being able to talk and draw. Isn't that impressive? Right? My wife was an elementary school teacher and she taught me how to talk and write and draw at the same time. Okay, so when I was realizing we needed to tap into this growth, this impact, a lot of it was because Authentic Brotherhood. I happened to have lunch one time with Tom Monahan, the founder of Domino's Pizza. It was at a Legatus event. I weaseled my way into the buffet line to get right behind him because I wanted to pick his brain. We ended up sitting down next to each other at the lunch. And Tom, who founded Ave Maria University and Legatus and so many other wonderful apostolates after Domino's Pizza, I said, "Mr. Monahan, I'd really like to ask you something." And immediately you could see the walls of defense going up because everybody hits him up for money. He's a billionaire. You know, that kind of happens. I said, "I want to learn how you took one pizza joint in Michigan and turned it into a global franchise operation." So over lunch, through this relationship, and we've kept in touch since then, he taught me franchising. And he gave me his book, and he's like, "Go apply it to pro-life work. That sounds amazing." So this is the model that helped us to develop leaders, to develop leaders, to develop leaders, what also happens to be the same model you've got in this book, just using different terminology. So here's where we began. We realized to get 40 Days for Life up and running, we had to attract people. We couldn't do it on our own. We couldn't do it by ourselves. So our first step was we said we've got to draw people in. I mean, we have to go out and speak. We have to go out and invite people. We have to go out and identify like-minded people. We have to attract them into our universe for this to work. But then the second step was we've got to build a relationship. We've got to get the know, like, and trust factor going. So I called this connect. So we're attracting people, we're connecting with people, and we're building a relationship. So my whole decade running 40 Days for Life, the majority of the time I spent was building relationships with leaders and the people that they were serving. Spent a lot of time, know, like, trust, loving on each other, serving one another. Even this evening, after this event, I'm going out at 5 o'clock to pray at the Planned Parenthood in Orange with Alejandra and Steve Baker, who run the 40 Days for Life here, and Yvonne Viramontes and others in West Covina are going to be coming over and joining because I love these people. We're friends. We've built this connection over time. So attract, connect, but the third step was direct. We're not just forming a social club. We've got to take some action. We've got to put our faith, we've got to put our convictions into some sort of action. So it was attract, connect, direct, give people steps they can take to advance the mission that you and they share. Now, why is this a circle? It's because it's a perpetual cycle that's always going. If we want to see that exponential growth curve, we're not just saying, okay, we're going to attract some people, great, we're done with that. Now we're going to build relationships, great, done with that. Now we're going to give them something to do, or else you're going to have people falling off at the front end. You've got to always be attracting, connecting, directing, attracting, connecting, directing. And when you do that, it turns into a spiral staircase that goes up and up and up. And that's where you get that hockey stick growth curve, is when you're constantly doing it. So that's what I did to build 40 Days for Life, literally from one town, 0 people, to 1,000 cities across all 50 states, 64 nations, 1 million volunteers, and 25,000 saved lives. 3 steps. Simple. Method. But guess what? I meet Curtis Martin. I meet Focus, and I get to know what they're doing because my kids are being touched and blessed on their university campuses by Fellowship of Catholic University students. And Curtis starts telling me about the content of this book. And he says, yeah, we've got this method modeled by the master, and he talks about how this was Jesus, the way he did it. He said there's 3 steps. I was like, okay. He said step 1, and this is in your table of contents, and we will dive into each of these steps. He said step 1 is we got to win. We've got to win people to the faith, and we've got to draw them in. The second step is we have to build. We have to build a relationship and build them up and form them in their faith. And then the final step is, see if I can write sideways, we send them. We give them something to do so that they become disciple makers, not just disciples. And I'm like, whoa, this is the exact same thing that I was doing, just with different words. Attract, we're winning people. Build, we're building a relationship, we're connecting with them and forming them. And send, we're directing them to go and do things to make a positive difference. So let's unpack each of these 3 steps. And under each of them, I'll give you 3 little pointers to just mention. And from those, you have some things to take away. All of this is in the book. So don't think that you have to capture all of it right now. I want you to get the concept of this. So what are 3 principles to win? The first is to recognize we've got to be a living witness. How do you win people to the faith? By them seeing you live out the faith. We've got to be a living witness. That's why the divine intimacy is so important. People watch what you do more than they listen to what you say. So are you living a witness? And if so, is that witness attractive? If people say, oh, you're always grumpy, they're not going to be attracted to the faith. But if you're always joyful, if you're always optimistic, if you're like Gil, or you're like Deacon Steve jumping up and down, they're going to be like, what is it about this person? They're living something different. I want what they've got. So the first step of winning is you've got to live this witness. Then the next step is invest deeply. What does this mean? Well, go back to Jesus and his example. Jesus reached the multitudes. Jesus invested deeply in a few. And for us, if we want to win people, are we willing to invest in them? Are we willing to meet somebody where they are, as we heard Matt talk about in the introduction of the testimony? Are we willing to meet them where they are, and are we willing to walk with them and invest time, energy, help them get to know, like, and trust us? Are we willing to invest in the lives of others? But then, we're not just about building friends. We're not trying to build a social club. The last step of win is we have to share the gospel. It's not enough for people to see you living out the faith. It's not enough for them to know you're a nice guy and I really appreciate the friendship we developed. At some point, you've got to invite them in. And that was very daunting to me for a long time. But I not long ago heard Jeff Cavins give a really beautiful description of the kerygma, the message of the gospel. And also Curtis talks about in the book, there's very simple ways for us to share the gospel. So one of the ways Curtis describes, and I love this, is there's good news, there's bad news, and there's better news. That's how we tell the gospel. What does that mean? The good news is God loves you and He has a great plan for your life. The bad news is sin entered into the equation and separated you from God. The better news is God sent His Son to redeem the world, to forgive your sins, to carry that to the cross, to rise again so you could spend eternity with Him. That's the gospel message. That's pretty simple. Hey, I got some good news, I got some bad news, but I got some better news. But the other thing that's so important in sharing the gospel is for you and me, gentlemen, to share our personal testimony. If we are willing to say, here's how God transformed my life, it's not just some abstract concept, but you're saying, I have a relationship with this Jesus, He's changed my life, and He wants to do the same thing for you. That's how you will win. You want more men in your men's group at your parish? Be a living witness. Invest deeply in a few men. Share the gospel and invite them in. And just keep doing that. So then we look at, now that I've got some of those men involved in our group, how do we go about, that's about helping them to become disciples. Right? Just bringing them in so they will make that first step. They will begin that journey of divine intimacy. But then build is going to fit closely with our authentic brotherhood. That's where we're building a relationship, but we're also building and forming them to live out the life of being a disciple. So the first step of that is faith formation. Deacon Steve, I love in your title that you're the Director of Evangelization and Formation. We are forming men to live out their faith. We're being formed at the same time, but it's a formation, it's a journey, it's not a destination. So how do we build? Once somebody has this encounter with Jesus and they say, I want more, they've got to now know what more there is. Are they diving into Scripture? Are they praying? Are they beginning to understand what the sacraments are and how to avail themselves? Do they know how to go and make a good confession? Are they referring to the Catechism of the Catholic Church? We're forming and building them up so that that faith becomes more substantive. The next step of building is, it's not just about living out their faith. We also have discipleship training. So we are training them not just how to live out the faith, but how to be a disciple. How they can, essentially, it's taking what we're talking about today and passing it along to them. And a lot of times the best way to train somebody is not a video course, it's not hand them a book, it's walk with them as you are doing those things. As they see you sharing your living witness, as they see you investing deeply in others, as they see you sharing the gospel, as they see you helping and growing in your own faith formation, sharing with them how to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And then the last step of building is we are trying to build them not just into followers, we're trying to build them into what? Leaders. So the way you do that is you give them incremental responsibility. I love that a lot of times you are inviting people to become leaders and they don't even know it. Because you're giving them little baby steps. Hey, could you lead next week's men's group meeting? Hey, could you share a testimony? The guys who got up here today, guess what? You're in leadership development. You're being given incremental responsibility, sharing something so next time you could do even more. We are developing leaders. And men, if you want to not have your entire men's group on your shoulders and you want other men so you can see that kind of growth we're talking about, you've got to delegate certain things to other people. Give them baby steps. Let them grow. Let them fail at some of these things so they can learn from it and they can grow beyond it. So you're winning people, you're building them, and then this is where the magic starts to happen, is we are starting to send. The first step of send is to recognize this as a second conversion. We have these encounters with Jesus to help us say, Jesus, I love you. I want to go all in for you. I want to live my life for you. And that's kind of that personal relationship. It's a whole nother thing for us to recognize I'm called to not only be a disciple, but to go and make disciples. And we have to create these moments of encounter for men. I believe this day we are here together, we are lighting a fire for you to have, if you haven't already, a secondary conversion where you're saying, it's not enough for me to be a great disciple, I got to go make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples. And if you have that conversion, if you say, Jesus, I entrust all that to you, it's bigger than I can do, that's when you'll start to see not just faithfulness in your men's group, but fruitfulness as it grows, as more men's lives are transformed. But you have to first have that second conversion. The next step is to realize this is all about forming disciple makers. So we have the conversion, that's the conviction in our head, but then we have to have the clarity of how we do this. We are sending men on mission to be disciple makers. So even as we initially we're inviting them to be a disciple, to love Jesus, intimate relationship, then we're inviting them to authentic brotherhood, to forge this relationship and grow and walk with them, help them grow as a leader even when they don't know. They're having this second conversion where they're saying, I need to do something more, and the more is I need to know how to go and make disciples of others, of other men, of all nations, and helping them to see themselves in that role. And then the last step is to realize this is how we tap into Curtis's words, spiritual multiplication, my words, exponential impact. Once you go through this cycle, go through it again, every day, literally snap a photo of this when we're done, or pull it out of the book and do it yourself. Put this in front of you, and if any day you say, what do I need to do next in my men's ministry? What am I doing here? Did I win somebody today? Did I build up somebody today? Did I send forth somebody today? And did I do these little steps? Will you fail? Sure. Will you some days put more emphasis on the build and some days on the send? Sure. But if you over time say, I'm going to do this over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, you'll get really good at it. You'll help others get really good at it. It's a simple model that others can fall into, and you will start seeing the impact of ministry to men affecting men across your parish, men across your community, families across your city, all across California and beyond. And just one final example I'll give you of what this looks like when it's not abstract and on a chart and in a book. Curtis Martin and his team, when they recognized this pattern, win, build, send, when Curtis captured it in this book, when they started living this out through their focus missionaries, which thousands upon thousands of missionaries on college campuses across America and international locations, two of those locations were ones that were very personal to my wife and I, because our children went to them. Our daughter went to the University of Virginia, and she was already good and solid in her faith, but when she was there, she had a missionary reach out to her. And the missionary said, hey, let's go deeper. The missionary was living a very devout, faithful life, beautifully attractive. That missionary began to invest deeply in our daughter. That missionary invited our daughter Claire to go deeper in the gospel message and to make that relationship personal, real, and on fire, and to keep her steel rod in the fire. And that missionary started investing in just her and a few other people deeply in forming their faith, teaching them how to be disciples, giving them incremental responsibility. And for our daughter, she started to go from her faith being personal and real to my faith is about how do I share this with other people. She had that second conversion. She began to disciple others while her time at University of Virginia. She began to see that she could have greater impact. Our son Patrick went to George Mason University. And when Patrick graduated, it was in the spring of 2020 when COVID had locked everything down. Horrific end to his senior year in high school. No graduation. It was all virtual. You in California know this better than anybody. But he started in college. Everything was on lockdown. And so he was in an isolated dorm by himself, as was everybody else, because you couldn't be near each other. What a great recipe for virtuous kids, being in an isolated environment. All the classes were online, even though that we were paying for a dorm on campus. I was confused by that. And guess what? Patrick, his dorm, was right near the chapel for the campus ministry at George Mason. And so Patrick walked over there one day and went to Mass. Everybody was spaced apart, but there was a young man in there named Justin. Justin came over and said, "Who are you?" Patrick said, "Oh, I'm Patrick, I'm new here." He said, "What makes a freshman, who doesn't have to come over here and go to Mass?" Patrick said, "Oh, I love Jesus and my faith's important to me." And Justin befriended Patrick when there was no other friend in his life because everybody was isolated. Justin was a living witness. He loved Patrick. He invested deeply in him. He was interested in, Patrick, what are your hobbies? Can I come along? Can you teach me? Let's go hiking together in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And he continued to share how Jesus had transformed his life. He invested in Patrick and helped him grow in his faith and his formation. He taught him how to be a disciple. He gave him incremental responsibility as things began to open up. Patrick had his second conversion and realized my faith's not just about me, it's about serving others and leading leaders. And so Patrick said, I got to be a disciple maker, and in so doing, I can have exponential impact. Because of what Curtis did years ago in identifying this path that Jesus has given to all of us, because he built an organization on this foundation, and that organization, through layers and layers and layers of leaders, impacted my two children. Today, their lives are forever transformed. Our daughter graduated from the University of Virginia and heard the call to religious life, and she entered the Nashville Dominicans. And she's been in 5 years now. She professed her first vows, and whenever we're going to see her this coming weekend in Tennessee, where she's living now, she's teaching religion to 8th graders in a school in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. She loves Jesus, and everything about her just radiates, I want you to experience the blessing and the joy that I have experienced. I couldn't be more proud of the beautiful young woman she's become because people were willing to win, build, send, win, build, send, and continue to have that impact. It transformed the life of my daughter. Our son Patrick, he led the campus ministry there at George Mason after he was formed as a leader. He was the student campus minister, and at his graduation, the campus ministry had a party where they gave an award for the one person in the campus ministry they felt had touched the most lives. And Margaret and I were there weeping as they gave Patrick an award for the impact he'd had on these lives. And when he graduated, he felt called to go on mission, literally, and move to Fez, Morocco, where he is teaching English to Arabic speakers. He's fluent in Arabic, and he's sharing the love of Jesus with people in a Muslim nation. He brings them with him to Mass. Don't tell anybody, because he could go to jail. And he is on fire for the Lord because somebody was willing to win, build, send, win, build, send, win, build, send. And today, because Curtis and other leaders formed other leaders and formed other leaders, my own children are leading people to the Lord in building God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. So that's what I want you to think about. What decisions you make today at this event will determine the eternal destiny for others. The decisions that you make, you know what? I'm going to start by leading myself. I'm going to ramp up this divine intimacy. I'm going to have more encounters with Jesus. I'm going to grow in holiness. I'm going to build that relationship. But I realize that I've got to have good brotherhood so iron can sharpen iron. We can help each other on this journey, and we're leading others. And then I'm going to take this clarity, this conviction of the little way, and I'm going to work on win, build, send, win, build, send, win, build, send, as I lead other leaders who can lead other leaders, and they become disciple makers, and we will see exponential impact. And I end this session, as you get ready for your final discussion, to go back and look at the words of the Great Commission, to go and make disciples of all nations. We need you right now. The world urgently needs you, a virtuous man, to live out your faith in a vibrant, attractive, beautiful way. For you to be that living witness, to be a saint in formation, and in so doing to find other men, to sharpen one another, and to grow in brotherhood, and all of you to be pouring into growing your own families and your own communities, and then developing leaders who will develop leaders who develop leaders, and by so doing, you will help to transform our culture. We will see the decrease in religious beliefs and practices on the upswing as more and more people come and turn to Jesus and live their lives for Him. You will see the increase in immorality reverse, and you will see more people living virtuous, holy lives. You will see more families restored instead of breaking down. You will see more people respecting the dignity of life, and you will see the church thriving and being the salt and light that we are called to be in the world. And by you deciding to be a leader of leaders, for you deciding to model the method presented to us by the Master, you will be an active part in changing the world for good and building God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Saint Michael, the archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen.